The gift was wrapped in pale yellow paper with a white ribbon. I know because I had been watching Margaret wrap gifts all morning methodically, precisely the way she did everything. Sharp corners, ribbon curled with the back of a scissor blade. The bow centered exactly. She had been arranging occasions for other people her entire adult life, and in 4 years of being her daughter-in-law, I had never once seen her arrange something that was genuinely meant for the recipient's benefit. She handed it to me last. Every other gift had been opened first. The onesies and the blankets and the breast pump and the book of names and the hand-knitted cardigan from my college roommate Dana that had made me actually cry, because Dana had learned to knit specifically to make it. 30 women in Margaret's living room, the house where my husband Theo had grown up, the house that smelled like lavender diffuser and the underlying cedar of old furniture. Margaret's living room, Margaret's house. Margaret's guest list, she had insisted on hosting, had taken over the planning, had selected the caterer and the flowers and the games and the seating arrangement, and had informed me of all of these decisions as completed facts rather than proposals. I had let her because I had been watching Margaret Holloway for 8 months, and what I had learned in those 8 months made her need to control the guest list feel very small. She handed me the last gift. Pale yellow paper, white ribbon, bow centered exactly. "This one is from me," she said. Her voice carried across the room. She had the voice of a woman who had spent decades ensuring that what she said was heard. "For Camille. With everything it implies." I pulled the ribbon, I folded back the paper, I lifted the lid. Inside was a document, not a card, not a note. A document typed, formatted, 3 pages, stapled in the upper left corner. Statement of account. A table, items, dates, amounts. Total due $30,000. Payment due 30 days from date of receipt. I read the first 3 items. Tuition contribution, Theo's undergraduate education. $12,000. Vehicle purchase, Theo's first car, $8,500. Living expenses during post-college job search period, $9,500. I did not read all of it. I had understood the document by the end of the first page. Margaret spoke into the silence. "You've been benefiting from everything I invested in my son for 22 years, she said. "Before you bring a child into this family, I think it's fair to establish what's owed." She paused. "Pay it or get out of my house." 30 women, not a sound. I looked up from the document. I looked at Margaret, her pearl necklace, her careful posture, the expression of a woman who has been preparing this moment for a long time and is satisfied with how it has landed. I looked at Theo, who was standing in the doorway to the kitchen. He had come in from outside when the gift started. He was holding a glass of lemonade and he was looking at the floor, not at me, at the floor. I thought about the document in my hands, about the 3 pages of typed items and amounts, about 8 months of quiet, methodical work, about what I already knew. I smiled. I picked up my phone, but here's what none of them knew. Not Margaret with her pearl necklace and her centered bow. Not Theo, who was looking at the floor. Not the 30 women holding their breath in that lavender-scented living room. Not Sandra Cole, the attorney Margaret would retain within 48 hours, who would spend 6 weeks trying to defend a position my 8 months of documentation had already made indefensible. What none of them knew was what I had been building for 8 months. What none of them knew was that the call I was about to make was not for help. It was the last piece. My name is Camille Okafor. I am 33 years old. I work with documents for a living, the kind that people sign without reading, the kind that look official but aren't, and the kind that are official but nobody wants you to notice. I have spent 7 years learning to tell the difference. The document in my hands was the first kind. And what I had found 8 months ago, sitting at my desk at 11 o'clock at night with a case file I had not been given, was the third kind. If you've ever been handed something designed to make you feel small, drop a comment and subscribe. Because what happened 3 minutes after I made that call changed every assumption in that room. And Margaret Holloway's face when she understood what she had walked into is something I will remember for the rest of my life. Margaret Holloway's living room had been decorated with the thoroughness of a woman who believed that the quality of an event reflected the quality of its host. White and gold balloons anchored at each corner. A banner above the fireplace in script that matched the invitations Margaret had designed and sent without consulting me. Catered food from the company she used for every family occasion. White roses in 3 vases because Margaret preferred white roses for formal occasions and a baby shower was, in her view, a formal occasion. I had arrived at 10 to find it already arranged. My own contributions, a playlist I had made, a small favor I had prepared, had been moved to the side table near the hallway. "I've handled everything," Margaret had said, with the warm efficiency that was her signature. "You should just relax and enjoy." I had relaxed. I had enjoyed what I could. I had sat in the chair with the bow on the back, facing the room, and I had watched 30 women laugh and eat catered food, and I had smiled at all of them genuinely, because they had come for something real, the arrival of my daughter, and that was worth smiling about. What I had also done in the months leading to this afternoon was watch. Margaret moved through her own house the way she moved through everything, touching surfaces, adjusting objects, maintaining control of the architecture of every space she entered. I had been watching this for 4 years. The hand on the back of a chair when she wanted the room's attention. The slight repositioning of a centerpiece when she felt something wasn't quite right. The way she managed the seating arrangements at family dinners, always knowing who sat where, always ensuring that the conversations she wanted to happen happened. 4 years of observation had taught me something about Margaret Holloway that she did not know I had learned. She controlled what she could control because she was afraid of what she couldn't. I had been trying to understand what she was afraid of since November. The answer was sitting in a folder on my laptop at home. The answer was also, I had come to understand in the last 8 months, sitting in the trust documents that Theo had never asked to see. I looked at the document Margaret had handed me. $30,000, itemized, typed, due in 30 days. This was the announcement. The story had been happening for 7 years. I picked up my phone. The room was still holding its breath. 30 women, white roses, the sound of the lavender diffuser. And Margaret Holloway, who had spent weeks preparing the moment she had just delivered, watching me smile when she had expected tears. Stay with me. Because the call I was about to make was not for help. It was the last move in something I had been building since November. And what it set in motion in the next 3 minutes changed everything in that room. If you've ever smiled when someone expected you to break, drop a comment below and subscribe. Because what I'm about to tell you about those 3 minutes is the part none of them saw coming. I scrolled to a name in my contacts. Not Theo, not a friend. The name I scrolled to was Patricia Wren. Patricia was not a friend, exactly. She was my most trusted professional contact, a specialist in family financial disputes who had been quietly reviewing the Holloway family trust documents for 6 weeks at my request. I had called her the evening before the shower. "Tomorrow," I had said. "If I call you during the shower, pick up. I need you to say 2 sentences." "What 2 sentences?" she had said. I had told her. She had been quiet for a moment. "Then she handed you that at a baby shower." "She's going to," I said. "I'm certain of it." Another pause. "All right," she said. "I'll be ready." I pressed call. Patricia picked up on the first ring. "I'm at the shower," I said. "She just handed me the bill." "I see," Patricia said. Her voice was the professional calm of a woman who has delivered difficult information in many rooms. "Would you like me to explain to Mrs. Holloway what we found in the trust accounting?" I held the phone out toward Margaret. "My attorney would like to speak with you," I said. "About the trust." Margaret's face in that moment did something I had not seen it do in 4 years. The composure, that specific, practiced architectural composure, cracked, not all at once. From the edges inward, the way ice cracks when the temperature changes faster than expected. 3 minutes after I had opened that box, Margaret Holloway's face turned white. If you've ever watched someone realize in real time that they had profoundly miscalculated who they were dealing with, stay with me. Because Patricia's 2 sentences were only the surface. What I had found in the 8 months before this moment was something Margaret had spent 7 years making sure nobody found. Subscribe, because the real story starts now. Margaret did not take the phone. She looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something when your brain is running very fast underneath a face that is trying very hard to stay still. Then she looked at me. "I think," she said, "we should discuss this privately." "I'm happy to discuss it here," I said. "Since you chose to raise it here, 30 women, not a sound. I need to tell you about Lorraine Webb before I tell you the rest." Lorraine had been practicing contract and financial law in Atlanta for 32 years when I joined her firm at 26, fresh out of law school, with a mind full of frameworks and almost no instinct for how the world actually worked. She was not a warm mentor. She was precise, demanding, and almost entirely uninterested in making people comfortable when discomfort was more instructive. She had a particular expression she wore when a junior attorney presented her with an analysis that was technically correct and practically useless. A slight narrowing of the eyes, a fractional tilt of the head, the expression of a woman measuring the distance between what you had given her and what she had asked for. I had received that expression 11 times in my first year. By my second year, I had learned to ask the questions she was actually asking, which were never the obvious ones. She had taught me two things that I carried into every case. The first, the document is never the story. The document is the announcement. The story was already happening. The second, when someone hands you a piece of paper designed to intimidate you, the correct response is not to be intimidated. The correct response is to understand what the paper is covering. I had been practicing those two lessons for 7 years when I met Margaret Holloway. In the 4 years since my marriage, Lorraine had been watching my situation with the particular attention she reserved for things she found professionally interesting. Your mother-in-law, she had said once at a lunch in the second year of my marriage, is a woman who has been managing things alone for a long time. She's afraid of losing control of the primary asset. Theo, I said, the money, Lorraine said. Theo is connected to the money, she conflates them. Classic trustee psychology when the trustee has too much latitude and too little oversight. I had thought about that lunch many times in the months that followed. It had come back to me with particular clarity in November, when Theo had slid a handwritten list of numbers across the kitchen table and said his mother wanted to talk about finances. I had looked at the numbers. I had thought about trustee psychology. I had thought about oversight and latitude and the specific gap between what someone believes they own and what the paperwork actually says. And then I had called Lorraine. Tell me what you need, she had said before I had even finished explaining. I need to understand the trust, I said. The real one, not the summary. Pull the public filings first, she said. Property transfers, court records, anything that moved through probate. Build the timeline before you look at the documents themselves. The timeline will tell you where to look, and if what I find is what I think I'll find. Then you bring it to Patricia Wren, Lorraine said. Not to me, I'm too close to your firm. Patricia handles family financial disputes. She's the right person. And in the meantime, Lorraine had paused. The pause she used when she was about to say something that mattered. Document everything, she said. Date everything, keep it clean, and don't move until you have the full picture. Another pause. And Camille, don't tell Theo yet. Not until you're certain. He needs to hear it once completely from a position of certainty, not in pieces. I had followed every instruction. For 8 months, I had followed every instruction. If you've ever been given a methodology by someone you trusted and followed it so precisely that by the time the moment came, you were completely ready, stay with me. Because what I found when I built that timeline was not what I expected. It was larger, and it had been hiding in the public record for 7 years, waiting for someone to pull the right thread. Subscribe because the next part is where the picture comes clear. I built the timeline on a Thursday night in November, 2 weeks after Theo had shown me the handwritten numbers. Property transfers, court filings, probate records, trust registration, the specific paper trail that significant financial activity leaves in public databases when the people managing it believe no one is looking. What I found by midnight was not a crime. Not yet. It was a shape, the specific shape of a trust whose distributions did not match its apparent assets, with the gap flowing in one direction toward one account over 7 years. I sat at my desk for a long time after that. Not because the numbers were complicated. The numbers were clear. I sat because of something I had found on page 7 of the trust's original filing, a handwritten note in the margin in Robert Holloway's handwriting that the notary had apparently not thought to remove before filing. It said, for Theo, everything I built is for Theo. 3 words, 4 words, 7 words total. Robert Holloway had built a trust for his son. He had written it in the margin of a legal document in his own hand, the way a man writes something when he wants to make sure it survives even if everything else is lost. And for 7 years after he died, someone had been taking it. I sat at my desk and I held that page and I thought about Robert Holloway, who I had never met, who had died 8 years ago when Theo was 26, who had built something and written for Theo in the margin because he wanted to be certain. He had not been certain enough about the right things. I put the page back in the folder, I dated the entry, I closed the laptop. I called Lorraine the next morning, I found the shape, I said, then call Patricia, she said. It's time. The Holloway Family Trust had been established by Theo's father, Robert Holloway, 14 years ago. It held the family's significant assets, 2 properties, an investment portfolio, a life insurance payout. Theo was named as the primary beneficiary. Margaret was named as the trustee. What Patricia found, working with a forensic accountant named David Reeves over 6 weeks, was a pattern that had been building since Robert died. The trust's investment portfolio had been performing consistently. The quarterly statements sent to Theo showed distributions that were accurate relative to the stated portfolio value. The stated portfolio value was not the actual portfolio value. Someone had been withdrawing from the principal, not from the distributions, from the principal, in amounts small enough to avoid automatic reporting thresholds and large enough over 7 years to constitute a significant sum. The withdrawals went to an account Margaret had opened 3 years after Robert died. An account in her name alone at a bank in South Carolina. Total over 7 years, approximately $280,000. I want to be precise about something. I am not a forensic accountant. I had not found this myself. What I had found in public records was the shape, the discrepancy between what the trust appeared to hold and what it appeared to distribute. The detail, the sourcing, the 40-page report that David Reeves produced, that was his work and Patricia's. What was mine was the 8 months of quiet, methodical documentation. The timeline, the folder on my laptop labeled simply MH. Lorraine had taught me the document is the announcement. The story was already happening. The $30,000 bill at the baby shower was the announcement. The story in that folder had been happening for 7 years. If you've ever held a folder that contained the truth about something and waited for exactly the right moment to use it, not from strategy, but from the specific patience of someone who understood that timing was part of the work, stay with me. Because the baby shower was not the moment I had been building toward. It was the moment Margaret had been building toward. And those are very different things. Subscribe, because what I had ready before she handed me that bill changed everything that happened after. Patricia had called me 2 weeks before the shower. The report is complete, she said. David has finished the accounting. We have everything we need to file. Not yet, I said. A pause. Camille, she's going to do something at the shower, I said. I'm certain of it. She's been building to it for months. She wants witnesses. She wants a public moment. Why would she want witnesses? Patricia said. Because she thinks witnesses work in her favor, I said. She thinks 30 women watching her hand me a document will make me less likely to challenge it. Social pressure. She's been using social pressure as a management tool her entire life. Patricia was quiet for a moment. What she doesn't understand, I said, is that witnesses work both ways. Another pause. Then, with the particular warmth that Patricia reserved for moments she found professionally satisfying, what do you need me to say if you call? I told her. She was quiet for 3 seconds. That's good, she said. That's very good. Margaret did not take the phone. She looked at it. She looked at me. She looked at the 30 women in her living room, whose expressions had completed their journey from surprise to something more complicated, the specific expression of people who have witnessed something they did not expect and are in the process of revising their understanding of what they are watching. I think, she said again, that we should continue this privately. In a moment, I said. I lowered the phone. I'd like to finish what I was saying first. She was still. The document you handed me, I said, is not a legal obligation. It has no basis in contract law. It references no prior agreement. It cannot be enforced. I set it on the gift table beside the onesies and Dana's hand-knitted cardigan. You know that, you've always known that. This was never about $30,000. The room was very quiet. What was it about? Margaret said. Her voice was controlled. But underneath it was something I recognized, the voice of someone who is choosing words carefully because they understand that every word is now being recorded by 30 witnesses. It was a test, I said. You wanted to see what I would do, whether I would panic, whether I would apologize, whether I would sign it to keep the peace. I looked at her steadily. You've been testing me for 4 years, the guest list. The shower venue, the trust summary instead of the documents. Each time you were measuring whether I would defer. Camille, I let most of it go, I said, because the cost wasn't worth it. But this, I looked at the gift table. This you did in front of 30 people, that's different. I picked up my phone again. What Patricia told you, I said, is that she has been reviewing the Holloway Trust accounting for 6 weeks. What she has found is the subject of a civil complaint that will be filed Monday morning. I paused. She was telling you so that you have the weekend to speak with an attorney. The pearl necklace did not move. 30 women, not a sound. And then Dana, from her seat 2 rows from the front, said quietly, "Can she do that? Just hand you a bill like that?" "No," I said. "She cannot. If you've ever watched a room that had been arranged to work against you turn one face at a time, stay with me." Because what Patricia had told Margaret in those 2 sentences was only the surface. What the civil complaint actually contained was 40 pages that Margaret had spent 7 years making sure nobody would ever see. Subscribe, because the reckoning that came next was not what anyone expected. Margaret moved. She stepped toward the gift table where she picked up the document. "I think we should. The complaint will be filed Monday," I said again. "That's all I wanted you to know today." I looked at Theo, still in the doorway. He was no longer looking at the floor. He was looking at me with the expression of a man who has just understood that the situation is considerably larger than he thought. "Theo will call you this evening." I looked back at Margaret. "I'd like to open the rest of the gifts now," I said. In the week after the baby shower, while Patricia finalized the complaint and David Reeves reviewed the last figures, I considered a different path. The direct one. Margaret had handed me a fabricated bill in front of 30 witnesses. I had an attorney with a 40-page forensic accounting report. I had 8 months of documentation. I could have pushed for criminal charges, not just a civil complaint, but a referral to the district attorney. Breach of fiduciary duty at the scale Margaret had operated at for 7 years was not merely a civil matter. I held that path for 2 days. I set it down, not because she didn't deserve accountability. She did. But there was something Lorraine had said to me once in my 3rd year at the firm about the difference between cases that were right and cases that were effective. "Anyone can be right," she had said. "The work is in being effective. Right means you have the correct position. Effective means the truth arrives where it needs to go and produces a change. Those are not always the same path." I thought about what I wanted to arrive and where I wanted it to go. I wanted Theo's trust repaired. I wanted the $280,000 accounted for. I wanted the independent trustee in place. I wanted, if possible, the version of this that left room for something to survive, not the marriage Margaret had decided we had, but the one Theo and I were actually building. Criminal referral would close that space completely. Civil complaint left it open, barely, conditionally, with no guarantees. But open. I chose the civil path. The second path I considered was going to Theo before the complaint was filed. Sitting across from him, laying out everything, asking him to be part of the decision. I held that path for 1 day. I set it down too, because Theo had been standing in the doorway of his mother's living room. He had watched her hand his pregnant wife a $30,000 bill. He had watched 30 women turn to look at him, and he had, for 3 full seconds, looked at the floor. He was not ready to be part of the decision. Not yet. He needed to hear the facts first, completely, from a position of certainty. The way Lorraine had said once, fully, not in pieces. I filed on Monday. I told Theo on Sunday night. If you've ever had to tell someone you love something that will permanently reorganize their understanding of a person they've trusted their whole life, you know what that Sunday night looked like. Stay with me, because Theo's reaction surprised me. Not the surprise of something unexpected, the surprise of something you hoped for but didn't quite believe would happen. Subscribe, because what came next changed the shape of everything. I told Theo on Sunday evening, our kitchen table. 2 cups of tea, the MH folder open between us. I walked him through it the way I walked clients through difficult findings. Sequential, factual, no editorializing. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time, then he said, "How long have you known?" "I found the pattern in November," I said. "I've been documenting since then." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I needed to understand it fully first," I said. "And because Lorraine told me you needed to hear it once completely from certainty, not in pieces." He looked at the table, then at me. "Who is Lorraine?" He said. "My mentor," I said. "The person who taught me how to do this work." He was quiet again. I knew something was wrong. He said finally, not this, but something, the summary instead of the documents, the way she always changed the subject when I asked about the trust. He looked at his hands. I let it go, I know, I said. I let too many things go, he said. He was quiet for a long moment. The specific quiet of a man doing an accounting he had been putting off for years, not of money, but of choices. Of the times he had looked at the floor instead of at the person standing in front of him. Of the Sunday dinners where his mother had moved the seating chart and he had laughed. Of the baby shower he had stood in the doorway and watched and not said a word. When he looked up, something in his face had changed. Not dramatically, Theo did not do things dramatically. But the change was real, the specific change of a man who has stopped performing the version of himself that was easier to maintain and has decided to stand on the correct side of the number. I stood in that doorway, he said. I watched her hand you that bill in front of 30 people while you were carrying our daughter. He stopped. And I looked at the floor, I waited. I have been looking at the floor for 4 years, he said. Every time she did something, every time I knew it wasn't right. He looked at me. I looked at the floor because looking up was harder, because looking up meant choosing, and now, I said, he looked at me directly, not at the table. Not at his hands, at me, now I'm choosing, he said. You're not looking at the floor now, I said. He shook his head. No, I'm not. What do you want to do? I said. File it, he said. Whatever needs to happen, file it. The civil complaint was filed on Monday morning. Holloway v. Holloway, trust beneficiary versus trustee, breach of fiduciary duty. Accounting, restitution. I had drafted the summary memo for Patricia the previous Thursday. 6 pages, single-spaced, every number reference to its source document, every source document reference to its public filing. Patricia had read it in 40 minutes and called me. This is thorough, she said. I know, I said. I mean unusually thorough, she said. Even for you, I had 8 months, I said. She filed Monday at 9. By noon, the case number was in the system. By 3, Margaret had been served. Margaret retained an attorney within 48 hours, not her longtime family attorney, who had quietly withdrawn citing a conflict of interest, but a woman named Sandra Cole from a firm in Buckhead who was expensive and effective. Sandra filed 3 motions in the first 2 weeks. Patricia answered each one without urgency, the way you answer motions when your documentation is solid. I kept working. Every morning at my desk, the MH folder open, the documentation current. I had added Robert Holloway's margin note to the folder, a photograph of the page dated and logged. For Theo. Everything I built is for Theo. I looked at it sometimes when the weeks felt slow. Not for motivation, I did not need motivation. For precision. For the reminder of what the case was actually about, underneath the motions and the responses and the procedural calendar. A man had built something for his son. Someone had taken it. The documentation existed to put it back. Margaret called me on a Friday, 9 days after the shower. Her voice was the voice she used when she wanted something and had decided warmth was the instrument. I think we got off to a bad start, she said. I'd like to sit down, I'm sure you would, I said. Your husband needs his family, she said. The baby needs her grandmother. I'd like to find a path. I thought about the 40-page report. About 7 years of $280,000. About the account in South Carolina. Your attorney and Patricia can find a path, I said. That's what they're for. I hung up. Lorraine called me that afternoon. I heard, she said. Patricia updated me. You've been talking to Patricia, I said. I've been consulting, she said. Informally. I wanted to make sure you had what you needed. A pause. You did this right, Camille. Every step, 8 months of documentation, clean filing, proper process. Another pause, shorter. Your second-year self would not recognize what you just did. My second-year self would have confronted Margaret at the first handwritten list, I said. Yes, Lorraine said. And it would have given her exactly what she needed to build a different narrative. A pause. You waited, you built, you let her announce herself in front of witnesses. Her voice had the specific warmth she reserved for things she found genuinely right. The document is never the story, Camille. The document is the announcement, I said. The story was already happening, she said. And you were already ready. If you've ever had a mentor who had been watching from a distance, making sure the pieces were in place without telling you they were doing it, you know what that phone call felt like. Stay with me, because the hearing was 4 weeks away. And what happened in those 4 weeks, what Margaret did, what Sandra Cole attempted, and what the judge found when she read David Reeves's report was the part my mentor had been building toward in 32 years of practice. Subscribe because the reckoning arrives exactly where it should. In the third week, something happened that I had not anticipated. Sandra Cole filed a motion I had not expected, not a procedural one, but a personal one. A request to depose me, not as a witness to the trust, as a party with potential knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications, on the basis that I had consulted with Patricia Wren before the complaint was filed, and that the consultation may have involved privileged information from the Holloway family's prior legal matters. It was a reach. Patricia said so immediately, but it was a smart reach. If it succeeded, it would delay the hearing by months. And it was designed to do something else, to put me in a room with Sandra Cole's questions, to make me the subject rather than the documenter, to shift the shape of the case from what Margaret had done to what I had known and when. I sat with that motion for 24 hours. I thought about the MH folder, about the public records, property transfers, court filings, probate documents, everything available to anyone with the patience to look. Nothing I had used was privileged. Nothing I had found had come from protected sources. The motion was an argument. My job was to understand it, not accept it. I called Patricia. "It's a reach," she said again. "Answer it cleanly," I said. "Every source documented, every filing public record, nothing that touches privilege." "I know," she said. "I already drafted the response." The motion was denied in the fourth week. In the fourth week, Patricia also called with news I had not expected. "Margaret's previous family attorney," she said. "The one who withdrew, he's contacted us voluntarily." "Why?" I said. "Because," Patricia said, "he was the one who set up the trust 14 years ago. He knew Robert Holloway's intentions. And he has records of a conversation he had with Margaret 6 years ago, in which she asked him whether certain transfers could be characterized as trustee compensation." "What did he tell her?" I said. "He told her they could not," Patricia said. "He told her the trust language did not authorize trustee compensation of that nature. She thanked him and he did not hear from her again." A pause. "He kept the notes from that meeting. He's prepared to provide them." I sat with that for a long moment. Margaret had been told 6 years ago by her own attorney that what she was doing was not permitted. She had done it anyway. For 6 more years. "Add him to the witness list," I said. The night before the probate hearing, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and Lorraine's first email to me, printed out 7 years ago on my second day at the firm. She had sent it after my first client meeting, which had not gone well. I had been precise and correct, and the client had left feeling worse than when they arrived. Lorraine had written 4 sentences. "Accuracy is necessary. Accuracy alone is insufficient. The work is to be accurate and useful. Useful means the truth lands where the person can do something with it." I had kept it because it was the best professional advice I had ever received, and because there were mornings 7 years later when I still needed to read it. I folded it, put it in my bag, the practical one, worn strap, extra inside pocket. I had carried it to every significant professional moment of my life. I dressed the next morning in a dark blazer and gray trousers. I made coffee. I drove to the Chatham County Probate Court. Patricia was waiting on the steps. Beside her, David Reeves, precise, composed, the look of a man who is exactly where he is supposed to be. And beyond them, Lorraine. I stopped. "You didn't tell me you were coming," I said. "I didn't want you to tell me not to," she said. She looked at me with the measuring look, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the fractional tilt, the expression of a woman assessing the distance between what she had prepared and what was standing in front of her. Whatever the distance was, she seemed satisfied with it. "You're ready," she said. "I've been ready for 8 months. I said. "No," she said. "You've been building for 8 months. Ready is something different. Ready is what you are right now at this door with what you know." She nodded once. "Let's go." The courtroom was small, wood-paneled, fluorescent lights. Judge Miriam Osa, 16 years on the probate bench, a very limited tolerance for fiduciaries who could not produce clean accounting records according to Patricia, was already reading when we entered. Margaret was seated, pearl necklace, dark dress, Sandra Cole beside her, posture straight, the bearing of a woman who had never once considered that a room might not go her way. She looked at me when I walked in. I looked at her pearl necklace. Then I sat beside Patricia and set my bag on the table and opened it and placed my copies of David Reeves's report in front of me, tabbed and indexed. I looked at Lorraine, who had taken a seat in the gallery. She gave me the nod. Small, clean. If you've ever walked into a room carrying 8 months of work and felt, for the first time, the full weight of what you had built, stay with me. Because what Judge Osai read that morning, and what she said when she set the report down, was the moment this story arrived where it was always going. Subscribe because the last part is the one that lasts. Patricia presented the case in the order that documents required: the trust filing, the asset history, the 7-year withdrawal pattern, the South Carolina account, the forensic analysis, the family attorney's notes from 6 years ago. David Reeves testified, precise, uninterested in drama, the way experts testify when the work is solid. Sandra Cole made her arguments. They were good arguments. She was a good attorney. But they were arguments being made against 40 pages of documentation that had been assembled by someone who had been told, at 26, that the work was to be accurate and useful. It was accurate. It was useful. Judge Osai asked 3 questions. The third one produced a silence from Sandra Cole that lasted 6 seconds. 6 seconds is a long time in a courtroom. Judge Osai's ruling took 11 minutes to deliver from the bench. Breach of fiduciary duty established. $280,000 in unauthorized withdrawals confirmed. Restitution to the trust ordered. Margaret removed as trustee. Independent trustee appointed. Criminal referral noted as a possibility pending the full accounting completion. Sandra Cole requested a stay. Judge Osai denied it. Margaret sat perfectly still through the ruling. Through the first finding, breach of fiduciary duty established, her posture did not move. The pearl necklace did not catch the light. Her hands were flat on the table, the specific flat-handed posture she used at every dinner table, every kitchen island, every room she had ever decided was hers to manage. Through the second finding, $280,000 in unauthorized withdrawals confirmed, something changed in the angle of her chin. Not dramatically, a fraction of an inch. The way a wall looks exactly the same until the moment before it doesn't. Through the third finding, restitution ordered, independent trustee appointed, her hands changed. They were still flat on the table, but the pressure had increased. I could see it in the tendons of her wrists, the specific whitening of knuckles that belongs to a person holding very tightly to the last surface they can control. When Judge Osai said Margaret's name in the context of the removal order, Margaret Holloway is hereby removed as trustee, Margaret closed her eyes. Not briefly, for 3 full seconds. And when she opened them, the composure she had worn her entire adult life, the composure that had dressed 37 years of careful control, that had centered every bow and arranged every seating chart and managed every Sunday dinner, was not entirely there anymore. It was still present in pieces, in the straightness of her back, in the way she did not look at me, but the pearl necklace which had caught every light in every room for 4 years lay flat against her dress, still, not catching anything. The room was listening, it had heard. In the parking lot, Margaret was ahead of me. She turned when she heard my footsteps. We stood in the October light, the pearl necklace still there, the posture still straight. Some things I had learned are load-bearing. You've been planning this since November, she said. Documenting since November, I said. There's a difference. She looked at me for a long moment. The specific look of a woman revising an assessment she had been operating on for 4 years. I underestimated you, she said. You didn't ask, I said. You decided. She pressed her lips together. What happens to the company, she said. Osai & Sons, nothing happens to it, I said. It belongs to Theo, it always did, she nodded. Something moved in her face, not apology, not quite, but something adjacent. The specific, reluctant acknowledgement of a woman who has been accurate about the facts and wrong about almost everything else. She turned and walked to her car. I watched her go. If you've ever watched someone walk away from a situation they built, not defeated exactly, but smaller, and felt not triumph but something quieter, more complete, stay with me. Because the last part of this story is not about Margaret. It is about what I built after, and about a conversation with Lorraine that I have thought about every day since. Subscribe because the ending is the one that changes things. Lorraine was waiting near the courthouse steps. She looked at my face for a moment. How do you feel? She said. I thought about it honestly, the way she had taught me to think about everything. Like a column that has finally balanced, I said. She smiled. It was the smile she reserved for things that were both accurate and true. Good answer. My daughter was born 6 weeks after the complaint was filed. On a Tuesday morning, in a hospital in Atlanta, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and the particular hopeful anxiety of a beginning, Theo held my hand for 12 hours. When they placed her on my chest for the first time 4 minutes after she arrived, in the specific, unplanned moment that nobody can prepare for regardless of how precisely they have prepared for everything else, I did not think about the trust. I did not think about the bill in pale yellow paper or the pearl necklace or the 30 women or the 40-page report. I thought about the margin note. For Theo. Everything I built is for Theo. Robert Holloway had written those words in the margin of a legal document because he wanted to be certain his intentions survived. He had not been certain enough about the right things. The intentions had survived. The trust had not. I looked at my daughter. Her face was the face of someone who had not yet learned that the world contained people who took what did not belong to them, people who centered bows and wrapped things in pale yellow paper and handed them to rooms full of witnesses and called it a gift. She would learn, eventually, everyone does, but she would also learn what I had learned, what my mother had given me without knowing she was giving it, what Lorraine had trained and Patricia had applied and the 8 months in the MH folder had proved. That the document is never the story, that the truth, properly documented, always arrives where it needs to go, that some women look at the floor when the hard moment comes, and some women look up. I held my daughter and I looked up. We named her Adise. From my mother's family, an Igbo name carried from Nigeria to the United States by my grandmother, who had told me once that names were the first document a child received, and that a document should say something true. Adise means daughter of the king. My grandmother, when I called her from the hospital, was quiet for a long time. Your mother would have loved that name, she said. My mother had died when I was 11. Not suddenly, a long illness. The kind that teaches you things about patience and documentation and the specific work of paying attention to what is real rather than what you wish were real. She had been precise, organized, methodical, the source of the instincts that Lorraine had recognized and trained. She would have, I said. Lorraine visited 2 weeks after Adise was born. She brought flowers, white, practical, the kind that last, and she sat at my kitchen table and held my daughter with the careful confidence of someone who understood that small things required steady hands. She held her for a long time. Longer than I expected. Lorraine was not, by her own description, a sentimental person. She was precise. She was demanding. She reserved warmth for things that earned it. Adise apparently had earned it in approximately 4 minutes. When she finally handed her back, she looked at me with the measuring expression, the slight narrowing, the fractional tilt. The expression I had received 11 times in my first year and had learned, eventually, to interpret correctly. She was not measuring the distance between what she had expected and what she had received. She was noting that the distance was 0. After Adise was asleep, we sat at the table. The trust accounting is nearly complete, Lorraine said. Patricia says the final numbers will be in by the end of the month. I know, I said, and then Theo decides what he wants to do with the restitution. It's his trust. I looked at the monitor on the counter where Adise's breathing was steady and even. I'm not part of that decision. I was part of the documentation. The rest belongs to him. Lorraine looked at me for a moment. You did something I've only seen a few times in 32 years, she said. What? You found something significant and you didn't use it as a weapon, she said. You used it as a correction. There's a difference. She paused. Most people, when they find what you found, they want the explosion, the confrontation, the dramatic moment. She looked at the monitor. You wanted the balance sheet to be right. The document is never the story, I said. The document is the announcement, she said. The story was already happening. She picked up her tea. Your mother would have done it exactly the same way. I looked at the monitor for a long moment. At Adise's breathing. At the name on the monitor's display, Baby Okafor, because they hadn't updated it yet to Adise, because the hospital paperwork moved slowly, because some things take time to be officially recorded even when they are already completely true. I think so too, I said. Lorraine finished her tea. She stood. She put on her coat, the good one, the navy one she wore to occasions that mattered. At the door, she turned. Weben Okafor, she said. I've been saying it to myself all week. It sounds right. It does, I said. Your second-year self, she said, would not believe this day. My second-year self would have confronted Margaret in November, I said. Yes. She said, and lost. She looked at me one more time. You didn't lose, she left. I stood at the door for a moment after it closed. The apartment was quiet, the particular quiet of a space that contains a sleeping baby, which is not the absence of sound but the careful management of it. I went back to the kitchen. I sat at the table. I looked at the monitor. Adi's breathing. Steady. Even. The breathing of someone who had not yet learned to carry anything heavy and who, because of 8 months of documentation and one precise mentor and one phone call made in front of 30 women, would have slightly less to carry than she might have otherwise. Not nothing, the world generates complications. Lorraine had said so herself, but slightly less, that was enough. The trust accounting concluded 4 months after the hearing. Restitution was ordered. The independent trustee was in place. The matter of criminal referral was ultimately not pursued. Patricia had recommended against it, Theo had agreed, and the judge had deferred to the beneficiary's position. Some things I had learned were about correction, not punishment. The balance sheet right, the truth where it needed to go. Theo called his mother. I did not listen. He needed that conversation in his own words without my presence making it something it wasn't. I went to the kitchen. I made tea. I sat at the table and I looked at the MH folder on my laptop. Still open, still current, the last entry dated the day Patricia filed. And I thought about what it had cost to build it and what it had produced and whether the two things were proportionate. They were, barely, but they were. He was on the phone for 51 minutes. When he came out, he sat beside me. He took my hand. She's going to be different, he said. I don't know how different, but different, okay, I said. She asked about Adi's. What did you tell her? He was quiet for a moment. The kitchen was quiet around us, the particular quiet of a home that has just done something difficult and is resting before it decides what comes next. I told her that if she wants to be part of Adi's life, she'll need to earn it, he said. Not perform it, earn it. He paused. She said she understood. I squeezed his hand once. He squeezed back. I closed the MH folder, not permanently, it would stay archived, properly filed the way everything was filed. But closed for now, the documentation had done its work. The truth had arrived where it needed to go. What came next was not mine to document, it was theirs to build. A year after the baby shower, I did 3 things. The first. I stayed at the firm. Lorraine had announced her retirement 6 months earlier, not fully, she clarified. A reduction in caseload, more consultation, the particular semi-retirement of someone who is not ready to stop entirely. She had asked me the week she made the announcement whether I was ready. For what? I said. To run it, she said. Not manage it, run it. Put your name on the door. I looked at her for a long moment. Webb and Okafor, she said. I think it sounds right. It did. The second, I started a fund. Through a nonprofit in partnership with Patricia Wren, a grant program for women navigating family financial disputes without legal representation. Lorraine made the first contribution. She did it without being asked, the way she did everything important, as if it were simply the next obvious thing. You should have done this 2 years ago, she said. I was building the MH folder, I said. She gave me the look, slight narrowing fractional tilt, then she laughed. It was the laugh she reserved for things that were both accurate and true. The third, Adi's met her grandmother. Not in the first months, those belonged to us, to the small, careful work of building a family on our own terms. But 6 months after the hearing, on a Saturday afternoon in March, Theo brought Margaret to our apartment. She arrived with no gifts. Just herself, pearl necklace, careful posture, the weight of a woman who has been carrying something for a long time and is not yet sure how to set it down. She held Adi's for 11 minutes. I watched her face. The specific, complicated expression of a woman doing the arithmetic on what she had done and what it had cost and what, if anything, was left. When she handed Adi's back to Theo, she looked at me. I owe you an apology, she said. You owe Theo an accounting, I said. The rest is between you and your own conscience. She nodded, small, tight. Something underneath it that did not yet have a name. She left an hour later. Theo walked her to her car. I stood at the kitchen window with Adi's against my shoulder and I watched them in the parking lot, Theo and his mother, standing beside her car in the March afternoon, talking, not gesturing. Not the loud, expressive conversation of a confrontation. The quiet conversation of 2 people trying to find the shape of something new. I did not know, standing at that window, what they would build. Some things take longer than a year. Some things take longer than that. What I knew was this: the story was no longer hidden. The announcement had been made. The truth had arrived where it needed to go. Lorraine had said it. The document is never the story. The document is the announcement. Margaret Holloway had handed me a bill in pale yellow paper with a white ribbon and a centered bow in front of 30 women in the house that smelled like lavender and cedar. She had handed it to me at a baby shower, in the moment she had calculated would produce the most pressure and the least resistance. She had handed it to a woman whose mentor had taught her, for 7 years, exactly what to do when someone hands you a piece of paper designed to intimidate. Understand it. Don't accept the argument. Understand it. The document was the announcement. The story had been happening for 7 years, and the woman she had handed it to had been documenting the story for 8 months and was ready in the specific, complete way that Lorraine had described on the courthouse steps when the announcement finally came. A D's shifted against my shoulder. Her breathing was the breathing of someone who had not yet learned to carry anything heavy. I thought about what I would teach her, not the law, she could choose her own work, but the instincts, the methodology. The understanding that paper is only as powerful as the authority behind it. That document's designed to intimidate work on people who don't know how to read them. That the first thing you do when someone hands you something is understand exactly what it is. And then, build. On the wall of my office at Webb and Okafor, beside my bar admission and a photograph of Adiz on her first day home from the hospital, I have a printed copy of Lorraine's email from my second day at the firm. Accuracy is necessary. Accuracy alone is insufficient. The work is to be accurate and useful. Useful means the truth lands where the person can do something with it. Below it, I have added one line of my own. The document is the announcement. The story was already happening, and I was already ready. Margaret had handed me a bill in pale yellow paper with a white ribbon and a centered bow. She had told me, pay it or leave. I had not paid it. I had not left. I had stayed in the room. I had read the document. I had understood exactly what it was and exactly what it was connected to, and I had let the truth arrive where it needed to go. That is not a story about winning. It is not a story about revenge. It is a story about a woman who was handed a piece of paper designed to define her worth, and who understood, in the specific way that 7 years of training and one remarkable mentor had prepared her to understand, that the definition was never real. Pay it or leave. I stayed. I built. The truth did the rest. If you've ever been handed something designed to tell you what you are worth, drop a comment. Tell me the moment you understood that the document was never the story. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe, because around here, the quiet ones always come prepared.